Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at our 11th episode of the podcast, Tuesdays Against Execution. Today, I'm honored to have one of the most relevant experts, lawyer experts on death penalty law, and I would like to underline that point, death penalty law in the United States. But before to introduce him, Mr. Robert Dunham, and I apologize for my pronunciation, I would just like to give to our public some details, some updates about the situation in Iran. So actually, we are at the 86th week of protest. I recall you that the prisons in Iran carry on the movement Tuesdays Against the Executions, which that podcast is humble tentative to amplify their voice. They are actually 52. And that we are now arriving to the anniversary of the protest carried out in 2022. And on this occasion, we would like to honor the memory of Zhina Amini, as like as to honoring all those having lost their life during the protest. I would like to recall to all of you that just for the start of the present month, more than 126 have been hanged. That unfortunately execution in Iran are still going on. The situation of women in prison is particularly grave, especially in 𝗘𝗃𝗀𝗀𝘀 prison, and I apologize for my not so good pronunciation. Today, also, I would like to call the attention over the execution of Navid Afkari in 2020, who sacrificed his life for the cause of freedom and justice of people of Iran. So the list of atrocities and the injustice, unfair detention, and arbitrary trial and execution is unfortunately very long. And that's why today it is my pleasure to introduce you Mr. Robert Dunham, and with him we are going to do a sort of comparative analysis over the death penalty law in the United States. You see, it seems it is possible to legally regulate death penalty, and what is happening in some way, what is happening in Iran. But Mr. Dunham also will help us to understand how death penalty has been used in the last couple of years in the United States, and the differences existing in some way among states. So let me just to give you 2 words about his expertise and his bio. So Mr. Dunham served as the executive director of the Death Penalty Information Center until January 2023. And as I said, is a widely expert on death penalty law. And since 2023 has been also the director of the Death Penalty Policy Project. Before to join the project, in March 2015, he was one of the Pennsylvania's foremost capital appeal lawyers, representing death row prisoners in state and federal courts, and before the United States Supreme Court. So the expertise of Mr. Dunham is so extensive, and the level of engagement in time is so extended that it is impossible to list all the work he has done during the years. So thank you, Mr. Dunham, to join us today. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Professor. And let me just clarify. I was executive director of the Death Penalty Information Center from 2015 until 2023. At that point, I created the Death Penalty Policy Project. I'm no longer with the Death Penalty Information Center, and I don't speak for the Death Penalty Information Center.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So I think I'm going to start with one introductory question. It would be a conversation among us, but the idea is also to have the direct voice from a leading expert about how death penalty, and if death penalty has been abused in or changed in some way in the United States, and try to find a comparative line with the situation in Iran. So the starting question is about do you have seen any change into the level of the execution in, I don't know, in the last 10 years or recently in general terms in the United States? And furthermore, just to understand also outside the United States, death penalty is present as a maximum sanction in every state, federate state, or just in few. What is the difference? Did you, most important, have seen any difference in application of the death penalty in the recent times? Thank you.
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting question, because there are international trends and there are national trends. And what's going on in the United States mirrors, in many respects, the trends worldwide. The United States Supreme Court declared the death penalty to be unconstitutional under the United States prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment as it was applied in 1972. And at that time, 42 states authorized, 42 out of the 50 states in the United States authorized capital punishment. When people outside the United States think about the country, they tend to think that there is one law that governs everybody, but that's not how it works. The United States is what's called a federal republic, which means that it's a combination of 50 separate states, each of which have their own criminal justice laws. And then there's a separate set of federal laws. When it comes to punishing crime, the states have primary responsibility for that. And each state has its own set of laws. So in 1972, 42 states had the death penalty and 8 did not. And the United States Supreme Court struck down all of the existing death penalty laws. At that point, states began reenacting new death penalty statutes. And in the 1990s, we had the largest number of states since abolition, since the Supreme Court struck down the death penalty, the largest number of states at one time imposing death sentences. That was 38. We are now at the point in which 11 states since then have abolished the death penalty. So we have 27 of our 50 states with the death penalty. Of those 27, 3 states have what are called moratoria on executions, where the governor has said that because of systematic problems in the administration of the death penalty in those states, the governor is not going to permit executions to go forward. And we have 2 states with the death penalty that have nobody on death row. So there are not going to be executions. Overall, we have just under 2,000 people who are condemned to die in the United States. But close to 1/3 of them are in the states that have moratoria on executions. So we're really looking at a population of about 1,200 people who are at current risk of being executed. And that's, for most people in the world, that's a large number. But let's put that in context here. Iran has executed more than 975 people so far this year.
Yeah.
So we're looking at the United States, which is one of the larger death rows in the world, and Iran is executing the equivalent of the entire United States death row that faces active possibility of execution. It's stunning. And over the course of 2 years, you're looking at a country in Iran that could well execute the equivalent of the entire population of U.S. death row. Now, having said that, in 2001, there were more than 3,700 people on U.S. death row. U.S. death row has declined from 3,700 to about 1,700, and it's done that not through executing people. We have had significant executions, but the main reason that death row has declined in size in the United States is that courts have been declaring death sentences in individual cases to be unconstitutional. And when the cases go back for retrials or resentencing, the prisoners are not being sentenced to death again. So the biggest decline in the size of death row in the United States is because there has been active intervention in the courts because of better representation in the appeals stage, and then there has not been the people whose death sentences have been overturned have not had their death sentences reimposed. That's changing. That's changing because the United States Supreme Court, the composition of the United States Supreme Court has changed. When Donald Trump became president, the first time around in 2016, he had the opportunity to replace 3 of the justices on the United States Supreme Court. 2 who had died and 1 who retired. And he replaced them with justices who are, in the way it's described in the media in the United States, quote, conservative. I don't think there's a whole lot that is really conservative about them. They are activist, more right-wing justices. And the change in composition of the United States Supreme Court as a result of Donald Trump's appointments has led to rulings that have significantly changed what is considered constitutional in the United States and have significantly expanded the powers of the President of the United States to take actions that are illegal and violate both national law and international law without any consequences. There was a ruling just before President Trump reassumed office in January of this year, there was a ruling late last fall that said that the president had immunity from prosecution for crimes that were committed by him during the course of his presidency. And as a result of that, we've seen a president who is much more radical in his anti-democratic activities. I've said in a lot of contexts that the biggest opponent of capital punishment around the world is a free and full and fair democracy. Because when you have fair trials, when you have fair prosecutions, when you have fair review in the courts, people don't get sentenced to death at nearly as much. And when they do, the flaws in the trials are able to get a full and fair review, and they tend to get overturned. That's what the experience had been in the United States. But even though support for capital punishment in the United States, public support for capital punishment, is at a 50-year low, 50-year low. The public opinion polls show that we have the lowest level of support for capital punishment since 1972, the spring of 1972, 3 months before the United States Supreme Court struck down existing death penalty laws. We have the lowest level of support for capital punishment, and more than half of Americans say that the death penalty in the United States is unfairly imposed. So even though support for capital punishment is at its lowest, and even though we're having only around 25 new death sentences imposed per year in the United States, a tiny number for a country this large that has that many states that authorize the death penalty. We're going to have fewer new death sentences this year than we have states that authorize capital punishment. Even though support for capital punishment in the United States is at historic lows, we are seeing an increase in executions. The reason, yeah.
So, sorry to interrupt you. Then what is interesting, thank you also for mentioning all those data, very important for our public and also for me, because I'm learning today from you. There's no doubt about that. So you did reference, I appreciate the phrase, the sentence when you said that when there is democracy, there's no need to have death penalty in some way. So democracy and fair trial, which is exactly the opposite situation we are having in Iran and other countries. But in Iran, the injustice start for everyone at the moment of the imprisonment. The imprisonment is unjust. There's no application of any kind of guarantee of fair procedure and fair process. For example, many of them remain waiting years and years in a jail for to know about the object of the accusation. So they are in a jail without having any news about the crime it is supposed they have committed, and so on. So this is really important to underline any kind of differences, because we mentioned that there is a death penalty law in the United States. And as I do reference in general terms to United States, but as you exposed so clearly, there are a lot of differences depending from the state into the federation we are based, and if we are at the federal state. I would really like to have some sketch in a comparative way, if it's possible,
Sure.
About what is your impression, because of course we think that in the United States all those guarantees are active, but is it possible to make a comparison and find any kind of how do you say that? Any kind of inequality also in considering the ethnicity or the racial origin of the supposed author of a crime who is in a death row in the United States. Thank you.
Well, let's start with a quick comparison between the death penalty practices in the United States and death penalty practices in Iran. One of the things that you touched on that's so important is that at least in the United States, you are not supposed to be detained without charges publicly being filed against you. So you have a right to know from the very beginning what crimes you're being charged with. One of the key elements of repressive regimes is that they detain people without charges, or they detain people for political purposes, as opposed to because of any actual criminal activity. And any country that makes the expression of political opinion a crime is a country that is acting in violation of all international norms. Iranian law has a couple of areas in which it is extreme and an extreme human rights abuser, and that is the charges of enmity against God and corruption on earth, which they can are vague things that they use to repress political opposition. And then there are the arrests that have been made because of people's participation in protests. And the right to protest is something that is regarded as a universal human right. Regimes that are afraid of the truth and are afraid of allowing their people to be free and have full public expression, they are the ones that resort to criminalizing that kind of activity. Iran is one of the most extreme human rights abusers in the United States. In the world, and it is those anti-democratic activities that are typical of its status as a human rights abuser. That's not supposed to happen in the United States. In the United States, you're not supposed to be charged based on your political views. But what we see everywhere in the world where the death penalty is employed, in every country, and I don't care which country it is that the death penalty is used when there is some sort of crime against a favored group. And it's disproportionately imposed against groups who are disfavored. Now, in the United States right now, the death penalty can only be imposed in cases of murder. Countries that allow it in cases other than for murder see even greater abuses. And Iran is a classic example of that. So Iran makes it so that there are certain drug possession or drug selling crimes that can be punished by death. In every country that has those kind of drug laws, they are imposed disproportionately against socially disfavored groups. So if you are a Sunni country, it's disproportionately imposed against Shia religious minorities. If you're a Shiite country, it's disproportionately imposed against Sunnis. If you are in Singapore, it's disproportionately imposed against immigrants of other nationalities. And in China, it's disproportionately imposed against racial minorities there and ethnic minorities there. In the United States, what we see is two levels of discrimination. The first is a kind of favoritism based on the social structure, in which cases enter the capital punishment system. And so the United States is predominantly a European Caucasian, a country of European Caucasian descent. Those individuals are described as, quote, white. There is a, quote, white preference in which cases advance to capital trials. That's partly because of just the social structure, and it's partly because of implicit bias, and partly because of overt bigotry. But essentially, we start the policing stage, and police disproportionately solve, that is, make arrests in cases with favored victims. And that's victims who are valued more. And that's higher economic status victims. That is police officers, cases involving children as victims, and so forth. What that disproportionately means that cases in the inner city, which tend to be more African American or Latino in their composition, those cases get solved less frequently. So more cases involving white victims move into the system. Then the prosecutors decide which of those cases are so bad that they want to seek the death penalty. Sometimes the decisions are based on bigotry, but more often they're not. But they're based on subjective judgments about which cases feel like they're worse. And the prosecutors in more than 99% of the counties in the United States, which is where the decisions on whether a case is capitally prosecuted or not are made, the prosecutors in more than 99% of those counties are white. And they make judgments about which crimes they feel are the worst. And they tend to make the judgment that crimes involving victims like them or victims like their family members are worse. And so that increases the white victim disproportionality in the cases. They also tend to make judgments based on which cases make them most fearful, and whether it's because of overt discrimination or whether it's because of subjectively held views that they're not even aware of. They disproportionately move cases with defendants of color into the system. Well, at each stage of the process of jury selection, the process of conviction, the process of deciding what the appropriate sentence would be, and the appellate review process, at each stage of the process, the people who remain or are put on death row and remain on death row are increasingly defendants in cases with white victims and defendants of color. Overall in the United States, you have about 40% of death row being white defendants, about 40% of death row being black defendants, and about 10% of death row defendants who are Latino, that is from Central America or South America or portions of the Caribbean, 10% being Latino or very small percentages of Native Americans and Asians. So that doesn't reflect the way crime occurs in the United States. About half of the victims of crime, of murders in the United States, are white. But more than 75% of the people who were executed were convicted of crimes involving whites. And this is changing. This is changing, and it's changing with the resumption of Donald Trump's presidency, with his second presidency. We've seen in the United States an attack on what are called DEI programs, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what's notable about that is it's essentially an attack on social programs that were designed to provide equal opportunities for all people. The Trump administration regards that as an attack on opportunities for white people. And so what was designed to advance the human rights and civil rights and social equality for people who historically had been disenfranchised, those policies are now being regarded as attacks on the white majority. That's reflected in the recent executions. We just went through a stage of 22 consecutive executions in the United States involving only white victims. Only white victims. And that was the second longest period of executions involving only white victims. We have close to 90% of the recent executions with white victims, as opposed to 75, which was already excessive. And at the same time, this administration has been attacking immigrants. We are, for the first time in at least my lifetime, spanning now 66 years, we are seeing a special police force rounding up immigrants or rounding up people who look like they're immigrants and putting them in detention facilities, and people don't know who is being detained. So we have people being made to disappear. And at the same time, we're seeing political rhetoric describing the United States inner cities, the United States major cities, as war zones, which is an absolute falsehood. But it is rhetoric designed to increase racial fears. And we're seeing political advertising blaming immigrants who do not have legal status in the United States. So it's a tax on people of color who are black, people of color who are brown. That's Latino, people of Latino descent. And in response to that, states have been currying favor with the president. So Florida has actually enacted an unconstitutional statute that would make any capital crime committed by an undocumented immigrant a mandatory death sentence. So we're seeing really, really significant problems. They mirror the global use of the death penalty, which is always imposed for crimes against favored groups and imposed against individuals who are not from those favored groups. We're seeing exactly that same thing. Historically, we're also seeing that the use of the death penalty in the United States has decreased significantly over time, just as it has dropped significantly from a global perspective. Fewer and fewer countries are using the death penalty. Fewer and fewer states are using the death penalty. At the same time, executions are dropping in most of the world, and they're dropping in most of the United States. But there are these outlier states that are accounting for most of the executions, just like there are an outlier group of autocratic countries in the world who are disproportionately responsible for executions in the world.
Yeah. So thank you very much for this very interesting background. So you say that it is a structural problem. You mentioned, you did reference to a sort of structural a problem in relation to inequality and inequity, if it's possible to use also that term.
Yeah.
So it would be interesting to have some details about the fact that how that kind of structural inequality impact over the use or not use and of the death penalty in the United States. And the other points I would like to underline with you is in relation to the use of law as a tool of fear in some way. When a democracy no longer exists, or we are in a different regime, like the absolute regime of Iran. So what is changing is the use of law not as a tool of regulation of human relationships, but as an instrument of fear. So I would like to have also your reflection, please, about that. Thank you.
All right, so let me break that down into two areas. First is the question of structural inequality, and the second is, I would say, the use of law either to promote equality or to promote inequality and fear.
Okay, thank you.
So, in terms of structural inequality, we see that everywhere in the world. The goal of human rights is for everybody to have equal opportunity and to be able to participate equally in society, and to do so peacefully and uh, in a fair and basically undisturbed way. You don't harm me, I won't harm you. Everybody gets the chance to live freely and to take advantage of all available opportunities. That's an ideal that doesn't happen anywhere. And the whole notion of countries using their laws as an instrument of social control arises from, at its core, the structural inequalities in all of our societies. In the United States, structural inequality affects the death penalty system even before anybody ever enters court. Because structural inequalities create social circumstances that make it so that crime is more likely to occur in some areas than in other areas. We know that there is a direct relationship between poverty and crime. And that's the case everywhere in the world. And that's why wherever in the world you are, if you are in an extraordinarily poor area, you're going to have higher rates of crime. People are more desperate. People are trying to just get money or food or whatever to survive. And they do more and more extreme things. And where you have greater incidence of poverty, you have greater incidence of child abuse. You have greater incidence of violence. You have all sorts of things that occur that produce crime. So there are structural inequalities in the United States. And that means that there are going to be larger instances of crime in more impoverished areas, and that's the case. It doesn't matter whether it's rural crime or urban crime, but there is going to be more crime also in urban areas because you have more people interacting with each other. Well, most of the people of color in the United States live in these urban areas, so they are disproportionately victims of crime. Which also means, because most crime is committed by people of the same race against other people of the same race, that you're going to have higher rates of crime by disadvantaged groups. That means you're going to be brought into the criminal legal system much more frequently. And that's the case in the United States. And I've already described the race of victim effects and so forth. That's part of the structural inequality. But the next thing is that capital cases are really important. They're really difficult to try. You need to have a lawyer. And if you're poor, you can't afford a lawyer. So structural inequalities in the provision of counsel are really important. And for much of the 1970s and 1980s, 1990s, and even to a lesser extent, but an important extent today, people who are poor are dependent for counsel upon whoever the court appoints. For much of the 70s and 80s, you would get terrible lawyers who didn't know what they were doing, who were appointed to represent people. And in the late 1980s, Congress created a program of death penalty resource centers, which were the first group of institutional capital defenders, lawyers who had an understanding of death penalty law, who could come in and represent people who are on death row in their appeals. I was the director of the Pennsylvania Capital Case Resource Center, which was the first office that did capital appeals in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the state from which I'm from. But there were 13 of these resource centers, and states began creating institutional public defenders who specialized in investigating things about a defendant's background that would persuade a jury that the defendant was not so morally culpable that he or she should die. Well, my hometown is Philadelphia, It's now the sixth largest city in the United States. And in Philadelphia, 200 people have gone to death row. The court system did not appoint the public defender. The public defender was not allowed to handle cases in Philadelphia for the first 15 years of the death penalty. And 130 people went to death row with court-appointed lawyers who didn't know what they were doing, who weren't provided resources, who didn't put up much of a fight and did not explain to juries the frailties in the background of the capital defendants that could persuade the juries to let those defendants live. In 1992, 1993, the Public Defender's Office was allowed to start handling capital cases. And their homicide unit specialized, not just in murder, but also in death penalty law. From that point forward, 85 people went to death row in the city. And the public defender was only allowed to handle 20% of the cases. So you figure, okay, that means 20 of their clients should have gotten the death penalty. It was zero. It was zero because the quality of counsel makes a difference. And my office and the capital habeas units that later on got created at the federal level in Pennsylvania overturned more than 150 unconstitutionally imposed death sentences with only 3 executions. And those executions were all in cases in which mentally ill prisoners who should not have been subject to the death penalty in the first place were permitted to waive their appeals. So counsel makes a huge difference, and the structural inequality that leads to the poorest of the poor getting the poorest of the poor in legal representation led to this huge increase in who goes to death row. Then the next structural set of issues were in what kinds of issues you were allowed to litigate. People think that courts, when courts exist, if they are fair courts, if they're not politically oriented courts where only the outcome matters, and the court is going to find a way to allow whatever the politically favored outcome is to be brought about. If you have a fair court, the court is permitted, the defense is permitted to investigate and present new evidence. The court is permitted to review all of that evidence, and the court is permitted to make free and full and fair judgments based on what the law is and what the evidence and where the evidence takes them. Well, that's not the case in the United States, contrary to all the myths about the United States being the fairest legal system in the world. That's not the case in the United States when it comes to criminal law. In the United States, the state courts have to hear your claims first. One of the really interesting things is that 85% of the executions in the United States take place in the states of the former Confederacy, the states in the United States that rebelled in the 1800s in order to preserve the institution of slavery. Well, they're the ones that historically have used the law most as an instrument of fear and an instrument of oppression and an instrument of social control. They're responsible for 85% of all the executions in the United States in the last 50 years. And they continue to disproportionately be responsible for sending people to death row and sending people to the execution chambers. Their state courts first, and the state courts everywhere in the United States, first have to review whether a conviction or death sentence is constitutional. They're the ones who appoint counsel in those cases. They're the ones whose judges make decisions about whether a death sentence is constitutional or not constitutional. And they disproportionately allow unconstitutional death sentences to stay on the books. So you get fewer reversals of death sentences in those state courts. What happens next is the case advances to the federal courts, and you get new lawyers to represent you in federal courts. And those lawyers are appointed by the federal courts and not appointed by the local state court judges. And that's where the death penalty resource centers came into the process in the late 1980s. And, well, what happened was cases began to get overturned in the federal courts as the flaws in the cases were being pointed out. And the congressional response was to change the habeas corpus law to limit the ability of the federal courts to act as real judges. And they enacted what was called the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Statute. I think it's really important that we keep in mind that this was part of a, quote, response to terrorism. Because it wasn't really a response to terrorism. But that is one of the most autocratic statutes that was enacted in the United States. And that law prevents federal judges from overturning death sentences, even if they know that the facts were decided incorrectly, and even if they know that the law was wrong. That law says that the federal courts can only overturn a conviction or death sentence if they find that the state court unreasonably applied clearly established United States Supreme Court precedent or unreasonably determined the facts in those cases. Well, what does that mean? It means you have a federal judge who may believe that a conviction or death sentence was unfair, but they can't do anything about it because they don't want to say that the state court process was unreasonable. And as more and more right-wing judges were appointed to the courts, you had a set of judges who themselves might be regarded as unreasonable, making judgments about whether other judges in the state court were unreasonable in the way they found the facts or unreasonable in the way that they found the law. And so we see a disproportionate number of judges appointed by Donald Trump finding that other state court judges who appeared to be disregarding the law or unreasonably determining facts, deciding that there's nothing wrong with what happened in the state courts. And we found the United States Supreme Court not granting stays of execution that had routinely been granted in the past. I've looked at all the death warrants that were issued in the United States in the past 10 years. I did that because once I started at the Death Penalty Information Center, we started monitoring all the death warrants. So my data goes back to 2016, which was the first full year that I was at the Death Penalty Information Center. And I've been tracking it ever since. In the 9 years from 2016 until the start of this year, about 1/3 of death warrants were carried out. This year, it's more than 2/3. The rate at which courts have been granting stays of execution has dropped by half. And the rate at which warrants has increased by 2. The rate at which courts have been stopping executions has fallen from 33% to about 11%. The rate is 1/3 of what it used to be. So this has emboldened states to allow more and more questionable executions to take place. There's a gentleman in Texas, Robert Roberson, who is unquestionably innocent. In fact, there is no crime in his case. It's a case of a child who had died accidentally, and he's being accused of shaking the baby to death. All the evidence suggests he's completely innocent, and Texas has signed a death warrant and expects to execute him. Tomorrow, for those of you who hear this at a later date, September 17th, Florida is about to execute an individual who is intellectually disabled. There's no question that he is intellectually disabled if you look at the medical diagnoses in his case. But Florida has interpreted the law in a way that makes it impossible for him to prove that. The United States Supreme Court actually struck down Florida's interpretation of the law, and the Florida Supreme Court said they will not apply that to cases that had already gone through the appeals system in Florida. So Florida has unconstitutionally denied review and unconstitutionally denied relief to individuals who are ineligible for the death penalty. And the United States Supreme Court has not intervened. We'll find out today whether they intervene in this case, but they have allowed, since the death penalty was declared unconstitutional in the U.S. for people who are intellectually disabled, they have allowed 28 executions to happen. So things are not as fair in the United States as much of the world thinks. Now, our legal system is incomparably better than the legal system in Iran. So with all the problems that we see here, you can only imagine how desperate the situation is in Iran.
Exactly. It's absolutely desperate. But you see that the movement inside the prisons still is increasingly strong, week after week, despite the more the situation is desperate, the more they speak up, they try to, they risk their life every week to try to raise up their voice. And that's why I repeat, and I never stop to say how much honor I feel to amplify their voice, and grateful to our guests of the past episode and to you today also to join us and to support the movement. I would like to ask you a lot of questions, and also for myself, because the other side of this podcast, from a personal and professional point of view, for me, is also a continuing learning from so engaged colleagues and lawyers and activists that we had in the past episodes. So it is also a privilege for me because of that. So thank you, double thank you to you for joining us.
Thank you.
So,
let me say something I think is really important here.
Yeah, please.
Iran is using the death penalty as an instrument of fear, and Iran is so, the government is so insecure and so lacking in public support that it feels the need to govern through fear. If it could govern through the consent of the public, it wouldn't need to do what it's doing. What repressive regimes have failed to understand, and this has been the case throughout history, is that when you create social circumstances that make people desperate, they will stand up for themselves. And that's what we're seeing in Iran. People are standing up despite immense personal risk. I said at the beginning that the greatest enemy of the death penalty around the world is a full and fair and free democracy. And so it's not surprising that autocratic countries that do not want full and fair democracies tend to use the death penalty as an implement of social control and fear. It's also not surprising that during this period right now in the United States, where we have a rise of attacks on democratic institutions, that's accompanied by fear-mongering rhetoric and divisive rhetoric and rhetoric that is trying to create social division and trying to paint political opponents of the administration as extremists. There are moderates in the United States, people who wouldn't even have been considered liberals in the past, who are being labeled as extreme leftists, and it's political nonsense. but it's designed to try to create um, hatred and extreme division, and that is what has been infusing the U.S. death penalty. We have a president who has unconstitutionally called for mandatory death sentences for murders that occur in Washington, D.C., where the public voted in the 1980s to abolish the death penalty. We are seeing the president asking for mandatory death penalties in cases involving the killings of police officers. Now, first of all, the killings of police officers are something that is handled by state laws. So the federal government doesn't have a business being involved in the attempts to punish state crimes. And the administration has been lying to the public that that's necessary to deter crimes. And he's militarized some of the cities, sending troops with guns to police some of the cities, all of which are, by the way, cities with Democratic mayors or Democratic governors. So it's politically targeting those cities. And he's used this falsehood that the death penalty will make the public safer. If that's true, then that's a reason to have it. So I looked at 30 years of data on the killings of police officers in the United States. And I looked at 30 years of data on the killings of civilians in the United States. And I chose the 30 years. It's actually 33 years. I chose that because that was the first year that the FBI kept the data on the killings of law enforcement in the line of duty. I didn't cherry pick the years. And what the analysis showed is over this 30-year period, consistently across the United States, people were safer in states that didn't have the death penalty. Police were safer in states that didn't have the death penalty. All this fear-mongering that the death penalty is necessary and that it'll stop these war zones that don't exist, all of that is false. And the notion that it will protect police is false. It is all part of the effort to divide society and part of the effort to use fear as a way of degrading democratic institutions. The United States is very different from Iran in a lot of ways, but the political playbook that this administration is drawing from is the same political playbook that repressive regimes like Iran use. And so the world needs to be aware of this. The people in the United States need to stand up to protect their civil rights and their human rights and their democratic institutions. But at the same time that we see dangers to democracy in the United States and in a number of European countries as well, we have to remember that it is far worse in some other countries. And when we stand up to protect our rights, we cannot forget the rights of others. And that's why podcasts like this are so important, so that people around the world understand how bad it is and how courageous the people of Iran are being. And as I said, we're trying to stand up for liberty and freedom and the rule of law in the United States, but we cannot do that at the expense of other people who are suffering and putting their lives on the line elsewhere in the world, including in Iran.
Thank you. Thank you very much for underlining that. And of course, I would like to say that you are wrong, that what you mentioned is only happening in the United States, but you are right. Europe is going increasingly down into guaranteeing standard of democracy, and we are assisting to an increase of discrimination and institutionalization also, if I can say, in some European countries, of disparities at the internal level among regions. I think, for example, to my country of origin, Italy, I cannot prevent myself anytime there is occasion to make reference to that, because nobody knows that still nowadays in the so-called civilized Europe, there are regions considered the last developed ones, where there is, according to UNESCO and UNESCO data, there is a very high level of abandon of primary level of education. So it means that still nowadays, well, the data are related to 2024. There are regions in Europe, especially in the south of Italy, of the level of children in the school of obligation, as the mandatory school, as it's called there. They are actually abandoning the school, because for a lot of reasons, especially the raising level of poverty. And you mentioned in your contribution how much influence is the situation of poverty and the relationship between poverty and crimes and vulnerability in United States. But I think it's applicable with due difference in relation to factors also in some countries of Europe, especially in my country of origin, Italy. So I thank you very much for your very kind, interesting, and intensive contribution. And I'm sure that our public will enjoy, exactly as enjoyed myself, to hearing you. So before to conclude, I'm going to ask you, please, just a short message to people of Iran and to people in prisons of Iran, into the 52 prisons, carry on the movement to states against executions.
Well, I think it's pretty much what I just said a couple of minutes ago, but you know, what the prisoners are doing is remarkable. It shows remarkable courage. And as democracies are under attack around the world, what everybody needs is courage. The example that's being set in Iran under extreme circumstances helps give everybody else courage. You know, it's hard when you have the kinds of things that are going on in the United States for the U.S. to exert pressure that makes a difference in the human rights activities of other countries, because the United States is falling behind when it comes to human rights. So leadership has to come from other places. And there are people who are fighting for democracy in the United States, and they're fighting hard. And there are people who are fighting to preserve the strong democracies that exist across Europe from the attacks. They are all acting courageously, but I don't think that courage compares to what we're seeing from not just the prisoners in Iran, but the people who are risking their lives and their liberty in making sure the rest of the world is aware. I mean, we are watching, and there are a number of us who see, and people are pulling for reforms, and we just cannot allow the kinds of human rights abuses that are going on to be unseen. The hunger strike, the courageous efforts to make sure the information gets out, all of that sheds light on what's going on. And you know, there's an expression that I'm going to botch, but you know, sunshine is the greatest disinfectant. I think sunshine helps the flowers grow, and sunshine helps protect democracy, and sunshine helps protect human rights around the world. And just like we want to help protect the human rights of the individuals who are wrongly detained and facing horrible situations, including wrongful executions in Iran, just as we are trying to shed light on that, the people of Iran are shedding light on how important democracy is worldwide and how important it is to have courage and to stand up in circumstances like this.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your words. And this I fully subscribe to what you said. And we are here because of that, because we stand up, even if online, on the side of justice. So on the side of the fight for justice and democracy. So, and I was just thinking about a sentence of Don Quixote, one of the most important for our public, one of the most important piece of Spanish literature, authored by Miguel de Cervantes. In a sentence, Don Quixote said to the assistant, Pancho, my dear, after all, we have to fight against injustice, fear, and ignorance. So that's the point.
People describe Don Quixote as tilting against windmills. But there are some dreams that seem impossible. But if we work at them and we keep working at them, impossible is only impossible until it happens.
Exactly. So we work daily to transform impossible in something normal. So thank you very much, Mr. Dunham, to join us. I apologize for the extended time, but it's impossible for me first to stop to hear our guest every week, and especially today. So I'm absolutely sure that our public will enjoy, exactly like me, this conversation today. And thank you for your support and attention. See you next Tuesday.